Welcome to this conversation, Building Futures in Rural Scotland. This event is being organised by SEDA Land, part of the Scottish Ecological Design Association. It will be chaired by Debbie Mackay, who's a director at Savills and Rural Housing Scotland. And it's going to be a discussion about sustainable placemaking. So not just housing, but also we're going to look at places people need to work and the related infrastructure. The format will be the same as all SEDA Land conversations. It'll be divided into two parts. We'll start with a short presentation from each panellist, and then a panel discussion, and finally questions from the audience. Between sections, there will be our usual artistic interludes, this time from artists who feel passionately about a sense of place living in rural Scotland. And they're from mixed ages, reflecting the multi-generational living that this conversation will promote.
So we'll also be asking you questions using the poll function, and I think we're about to head into our first poll.
And I will share with you the results. Keep voting, it'll come up live as you vote.
Good stuff. So we'll keep going because time is tight, so we'll see the results shortly. But shortly we'll be going into our first poem. And just to let you know that every time a speaker or artist is introduced by me, a brief description of them will appear in the chat box with a link to the SEDA Land website. So there's a fuller description, so I won't be repeating bios to save time. That's interesting, just watching the poll. I thought this was an incredibly well-known statistic, so it'll be interesting to consider that later. So let's hear from Frank Hambling, who's a 13-year-old pupil from the Gordon Schools Huntly, and he will read Huntly, My Home.
Hello. In Huntly, where the rolling hills meet the sky with peaceful stills, there lies a town, small but bright, where love and kindness shine like light. Here the streets are paved with care, and neighbours greet you everywhere. For in this small community, everyone knows everyone, you see. The baker with her smiling face sells her bread with love and grace, and the farmer with his honest toil brings fresh produce from the soil. The children who are playing in the park, their laughter echoes through the dark, and elders sit and share their tales of bygone times and ancient tales. In Huntly, where bonds grow strong, where hearts unite in joyful song, where there's a warmth that fills the air and a love that is beyond compare. For in this town, where everyone knows, the spirit of the community glows, and each person with their unique heart contributes to the beating heart. So here's to Huntly, small and grand, where love and kindness grow in hand. May it always be a shining light, a place where love takes flight. So here is Huntly, my home.
Wow, Frank, that's amazing. I wish we could be giving you a round of applause, but it doesn't quite work on Zoom. I had the sneak preview of your poem, but I absolutely love the line, the children play in the park, their laughter echoing through the dark. That's a real childhood memory for me, giving me a lovely shiver. Frank, thank you so much. I think you'll be grabbed by the tourist board for Huntly if there is such a thing. Thank you so much for doing that for us. Right, so charging on to our next poll to keep you all busy, so it's not just us and the panelists doing all the work this afternoon. Our next poll will pop up into the chat. And Frank's getting some lovely comments there. I think you're going to have a surge in the population of Huntly. Everybody wants to move there.
The poll should be there.
So what would make you want to move to or remain in a rural community? And you can select as many of you as you want in the order you prefer. There's 10 options in total. So I'll just let you do that for a few seconds, and then I will turn to the first three of our panelists. So they've all been firmly told by SEDA to be passionate, provocative and positive. And they're all to sum up with one top tip to take things forward. And they're not allowed to speak for longer than 5 minutes, so somebody has tried to sneak a little bit longer than that. So SEDA Land works its panelists hard, is all I can say. So I'm sure they will all rise provocatively to the challenge. So the first to speak is Craig McLaren, Director of Scotland, Ireland and English regions of the Royal Town Planning Institute. So Craig, can I just hand over to you?
Thanks very much, Debbie. It's nice to see everybody, and well done with that poem, Frank. That was fantastic. Building futures in rural Scotland. So what is planning if it isn't about the future? Can we get the first slide up, please, actually? Is it showing? Right, I hope my 5 minutes only starts now, Debbie. Stalling for time. Okay, yeah, so as I said, what's planning for the future? We've got a new national planning framework in place, one which puts climate change, nature, biodiversity crisis as front and centre, which is great. I think one of the really key things about it is it emphasises the importance of place, is what we're talking about just now, and the whole idea of place-based programmes, and the fact that planning and plans are enablers of good development, and it embeds rural within it as well. There's a fair amount of reference to rural areas in there and what needs to be done with them. Next slide, please. I think for me, what we need to try and do in terms of the future is to try and create great places within a new context. We need to do some shifts from current approaches. So I think one of the key things we want to do is we want to start with what a place could be like. We need to start with a place vision. We need to move away from short-term approaches and look more at short, medium and longer-term approaches as well. And we need to take a much more measured and planned approach, a holistic view of what our places could be, not just economic and project-based approaches, which seems to be the sort of approach we've had in the past just now. So this idea of developing a place vision is incredibly important. And from there, it's trying to look to ensure that the development works in the long-term public interest. And as some of you may know, that we had a Planning Act introduced in 2019, and one of the things which we reported on this or pushed for was the idea of having a purpose for planning. And the purpose of planning now is to develop land in the long-term public interest, and that's one of the things we really need to embed in what we do. Next one, please. So in terms of trying to do that, 4 things I think are important, and this what I would call a new system, although a lot of it isn't really particularly new, just needs to be done. We need to have a much more front-loaded and proactive approach to how we develop our places. So we need to have early engagement. We need to try and develop that vision, looking at what the options, the opportunities, the constraints, the context is for that vision, having a really mature conversation about that. And from there, we need to build a route map, which sets out roles, responsibilities, and milestones. And there's roles for that in such new things such as local place plans, development plans, and charrettes, and places where we can have these discussions at the start and have the vision, but then the route map, which is important. We also need to have put place at the centre of decision making in local authorities and government, and as part of that, I think the idea of sustainable development, the idea of long-term approaches is really, really important. And one of the things we're promoting is that there should be a chief planning officer in every local authority, which promotes this and gives a voice to place-based approaches in each local authority, and we're working with the Scottish Government on that. And I think the third thing we need to do is think less about process and think more about what we're actually trying to achieve. So we need to look at what the outcomes are we're trying to achieve. And one of the things I think is an important aspect of looking at that is, even it sounds a bit dry, but a performance framework and the performance management system tells you what you need to achieve. So if you focus that on outcomes rather than how many planning applications you need to approve and how quickly you need to do it, that might change the behaviours and the way in which we do things and make us really focus on what the outcome is at the very end of it as well. But we also need to try and make sure these things can be delivered, and planners can find the vision and work with people to develop a vision, but we need to have the capital infrastructure, the capital finance behind that to make these visions a reality. And finally, I think for me, places have to be valued and resourced, and just some examples from the planning profession, who I think are at the forefront of trying to make this happen, is that we are a profession which is under a lot of pressure at the moment. We have lost 30% of our budget since 2009, lost a quarter of staff since 2009 as well. The average cost of processing a planning fee only meets 60% of, so the fee only meets 60% of the costs. And we've got a demand for new planners as well, which is coming our way because we get more and more things being asked of us, and we're going to need 700 new planners in the next 10 years, which is quite an ask considering the RTPI membership in Scotland now is only 2,100, so we did another third as well. So my one last thing I wanted to say as a provocation is that what we need to do now is really start with this place vision. That's the way in which we can get everybody together to try and look at what could be what the possibilities are, and from there flows everything else. So place vision first.
Excellent. I think you stuck beautifully to time there, so thank you very much, Craig. Next up is Ian Merrill, who's a research fellow in rural policy at SRUC. Ian.
Hi, thanks for having us today. Joining just south of the border in Northumberland. Yeah, my talk today will be on a slightly reduced scale to Craig's initial comments about the planning system. I propose a smaller, locally focused intervention called Rural Enterprise Hubs, very similar to co-working spaces and business hubs in general. So Rural Enterprise Hubs are physical infrastructures that provide much needed workspaces for rural areas. There is a massive dearth of places for businesses to grow and have a community around them. So rural enterprise hubs are a combination of closed offices, but then also open spaces for collaboration and networking. They provide opportunities for businesses to learn from each other. And they also provide a platform for business support officers to be able to deliver business support through. They're a place which can become quite central to a rural community through various research that I've done in Northumberland, the southwest of England, and also starting to in Scotland as well. There's great examples of hubs that have become centerpieces in communities in terms of helping people to avoid the social isolation of working from home, especially if you're a startup rural business. It gives you a place to leave the house and to join a community. This is particularly important as well because when we're trying to attract new residents to a rural area, for example, or to maintain young people in that rural area, they need places to be able to start businesses from. And this can be quite an appealing prospect for someone that might be looking at an area or alternatively looking to move away. And this can provide infrastructure for people to actually stay and live and work in the area. A similar concept to enterprise hubs is co-working spaces, but then also recently a growing trend in co-working, co-living spaces as well. Again, this would be a great initiative for people to think about in their local areas if they want to try and attract people to come and live and work in the area. One particular flavour of rural enterprise hubs, let's say, is what we call honeypot hubs, and these are particularly interesting and particularly salient to rural development because a lot of them have an arts and crafts theme. So a honeypot hub for us, and in my research, which you can look up afterwards, is a hub that has forward-facing businesses, public-facing businesses that want to provide services or products to the general public who are passing by. And many of these have an arts and crafts theme, and we found that if you attach these onto what is already a popular tourist destination or a cultural heritage site, for example, it gives the site itself a larger draw, but then it also gives the businesses a much higher footfall than what they would have had if they were operating alone. I guess my one suggestion for helping to build placemaking would be for local authorities, for third sector organisations, for particularly if they have infrastructure that is being underused or want to try and improve their budgets, to look into the concept of rural enterprise hubs. And I'll be happy to take more questions as well in the discussion afterwards. I've quickly got a couple of slides just to show you some examples. I know I'm running out. Am I running out of time?
You're actually not too bad.
Okay, so if you can flip forwards to the slides with a black background, that would be ideal. Okay, so 3 examples for you. So this is Dissington Hall. This is quite a grandeur design in a country hall. They used to do weddings and they decided to move to rural enterprise hubs. And you can see in the picture in the middle, they have very attractive views from their offices. If we can go to the next one, please, I'll just try and keep in time. This is one in Hexham in Northumberland, Eastbourne, and this was the national park, and they were struggling with having their budgets cut. So they opened up parts of their building to welcome in tenants. but then they also designed, in the middle photo, you'll see individual pods as well. These have got several month waiting lists now as well, so very popular. And this is an example of how they've helped to subsidise the running of the national park. Next one, please. And then lastly, one from the southwest of England. This is Spithurst Pub in Sussex. Very modern design, and this one is a great example of how a co-working space can work in the countryside. I put this in as some best practice because they're particularly good at garnering the sense of community in that hub. So they have a lot of times during the day where they all break out and have coffee breaks and lunches together. So I'll keep it at that just so we're not overrunning. But thank you, and I'm happy to answer more questions later.
Good stuff. Ian, beautiful pictures. Very happy to have you overrun a little bit there. And I think we are actually ahead of time, but don't tell anybody. Ariane Burgess, MSP for the Scottish Green Party for the Highlands and Islands. Can I introduce you next?
Hi. Thanks so much. This is, I think I'm here just to really mainly listen to brilliant presentations that have already gone so far. I think what I'll do is I'll go back to, rather than talking about a lot of opportunities in policy, I'll go back to what I was doing before I got elected and how I'm carrying that through. So before I got elected, I was really interested in the idea of how do we create communities, human settlements that meet human need while supporting the natural environment to regenerate. And I think we've got incredible opportunity right now in Scotland to be doing more of that. And I think we've been doing it, but we've got, that opportunity. So a model that I work with around creating the community is looking at the economic aspect, the social aspect, the ecological aspect, and the cultural aspect of any community. And I'll go into each of those pillars a little bit. So in the ecological, what I'm talking about there is the housing, but not the housing that we see, kind of the standard housing we see, but housing that works with nature, housing that's built from timber grown in Scotland. That's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. How do we remove the blocks and bring that forward? Other ecological aspects. How do we work with water that meets our needs, but also we are putting it through living systems, so we're cleaning it rather than putting it into sewer systems. Social. I think that so we're very good on the kind of like housing aspects in the built environment. Social, we could do with some work on the infrastructure of what I call a soft infrastructure. So and when I say we could do better on it, I mean I think this government could support the bringing in of soft infrastructures that would be facilitators, because right now across the region, Highlands and Islands or rural Scotland, we have got to go through massive changes, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And I believe that right now we need many people with that facilitation skill to take us through, to pull people together, to pull communities together who haven't had that experience of working together yet, but will have to work together in the face of climate and nature emergency. And I think that needs to be facilitated. It's not good enough to leave people alone to try to figure that out. And I know that there are many good people trying to do that, but I don't think that they're supported enough in that. Other aspects of social, of course, is that social interaction needs to be fun. So everything we're doing, even though we're in a challenging time of change, we look for that opportunity to have shared experiences that lift life a bit and give us that fun. The economic aspect, which I will go deeper into, that's kind of where I want to kind of go further on in this conversation, is looking at how do we, well, I think the tremendous opportunity right now is the forthcoming community wealth building bill. Its consultation is on until the 9th of May. And I know that communities have already been doing community wealth building in rural Scotland, but now we've got an opportunity to look at how can we give communities much more support through that bill. So, really encouraging everyone to participate in that. So community wealth building is really about the community creating owning the assets, owning the wealth, and then generating more and keeping it local. And I've been speaking to a number of communities across my region who have had that tremendous opportunity to find wealth through renewable energy. And from that, either a hydro scheme or a wind scheme, they then have a powerful economic driver to then be able to look at much more long-term thriving of their communities, rather than this awful system that we have right now, which is most often one-year grants, lurching from one-year grants and reporting. So finding that economic driver is really important. Of course, not all communities in rural Scotland can access wind or water and get that driver, but there are other opportunities. I recently was at an event in Highland. It wasn't really a community, but I think they're becoming a community, and that was Trees for Life. They're an organization that are focused on rewilding, and they've just opened a rewilding center. And I believe that that's going to be an incredible community wealth building center. They're on the road between Loch Ness and Skye, so you can imagine there's a lot of traffic there. They've got an incredible cafe in this center, and they've employed 20 full-time equivalent people from the local community. So I think it's just the beginning. And I find that very inspiring. And the other aspect, which kind of leads in from the work that they're doing at that project, is the cultural piece. So I've talked about the ecological, the social, the economic, and the cultural piece. So cultural, of course, in rural Scotland can include our languages. So Gaelic, and at the Dundregan Rewilding Centre, they have everything in Gaelic. It's English and Gaelic, and the language runs through it all. And of course, we have Scots as well. And then we have all the languages that come to Scotland from our new Scots. So language is an important part. And I think also another piece for me, culture, and I think that's true in the historical culture of Scotland, is our relationship to nature, which I believe at this time we are absolutely being called to rekindle our relationship with nature. COVID did it, climate and the nature emergencies are doing it. And for us to sit with that question, how can we create communities that meet human need while supporting the natural environment to restore and to regenerate? I'm just going to, Debbie, I forgot to put my timer on, so I'm going to just check time with you.
Yes, you've got a few more minutes. You're okay. Okay,
great. Thanks very much. So yeah, so just on the community wealth building piece, I think the invitation there from people who are talking about community wealth building is actually about radically restructuring our economy. And I think it's an incredibly exciting opportunity for rural Scotland. We've got many aspects that are going to be changing. In this session alone, the things that are being brought forward that we have to tackle because of the climate nature emergency include things like we've got obviously lots of nature restoration going on, and so peatland restoration is bringing a great strand of employment into the rural area, into our rural areas. We're going to be needing to, there's a lot of work being done on restoring Scotland's rainforest. Who knew we had a rainforest? Isn't that fantastic? And there's a lot of work being done on that. And that would, if we can find the public-private finance for that, we could see, again, a great deal of jobs that are working with nature rather than against. And I think this is, again, how do we support communities to move and make that transition away from maybe some of the traditional rural work we had, which has been working against nature really primarily, into a direction where we're actually supporting nature to flourish and thrive. And then another area that's kind of connected to the rainforest, but is more in the realm of commercial timber, the commercial forestry, is that that is going to grow exponentially, and there's a credible long-term opportunity there. And again, something that I'm looking for, which I spoke about earlier, is how do we start to look at that circular economy, that joining the dots where we're growing the timber in place, and we know the number of houses we're going to need to build into the future, and we've got the timber growing for it right there in the local community. So it's that, how do we start to join all those dots, bring things more closely to home, and really kind of tap into the 5 pillars of community wealth building, which is the land and property, it's democratic finance, it's local procurement, and multiple ownership of the economy. So again, I've been speaking to communities where there's lots and lots of, they have maybe the same people are on different work in with different hats in different entities within the community, but they have multiple ownership and lots of people involved in community benefit societies and so on and so forth. So I think we've got tremendous opportunity. And I would say that in closing, my provocation, because I know that engaging with consultations can be a bit challenging, is please do engage with the community well building consultation, which is on until the 9th of May, and get in there and bring forward your radical ideas around how we can build community and create the communities that are, as I said at the beginning, meet human need while supporting the natural environment to regenerate.
Thank you very much, Ariane. So you caught us up on time. We built a little bit of slack in there, but we're thoroughly on time now, so the pressure's on me. Okay, well, look, thank you very much for all your contributions. We're going to have a little bit of a break now. Can I just encourage you to be putting your questions in the chat box? I've seen a few good questions coming in already, and please keep that going, because it makes the back of office team's life an awful lot more easy. Interesting. We've got some results from the poll, which again, you can go and have a look at, and I'm not going to try to diagnose just at the minute, but first is beautiful surroundings and housing suited to my need is second. So sorry, I'm getting drawn into the poll, right? I better get a grip. So Ariane, thank you very much. I think Neil Sutherland will have something to say later on about circular economy and using natural materials local to home. So we now have, I think, peculiarly lovely to SEDA. We're now going to have another artistic contribution. So Sophie Cook will read Hillside and Hedge. So Sophie, can I hand over to you?
Hi, everyone. Really interesting to hear all these contributions. Thank you. So this is my poem, Hillside and Hedge. Come closer, light the fire, stand back and watch it burn. From the first orange glow to that crack unfurling yellow, the kindlings took, the logs are smouldering. Turn and look at your people gathered where you live. Lay your head on your pillow in a soft darkness, your window curtained against the moon. Go to the places you must go alone, the ways of the rivers in the sky, the ways of the lines in your palm, in the land of your soul. Wash yourself in water from the burns, the lochs, drawn into your tank. Rise on the tide of the sun and work, doing the things you do that weave your life into the bigger web beyond this. Meet. Make your life from these, the different patches, the hours, like fields of different crop on the hillside. The hedgerows in between where the sweetest moments live. The joke, the touch, the dance, the companionable meal. The wildflowers and the birds that spring upon your year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Really, really lovely. And do you know what? Again, sneak preview, I had read it earlier, and my favorite line at that stage was, go to the places you must go alone. Quite shivery comment, but actually, I now love the practicality of wash yourself in water from the burn of the lochs drawn into your tank. I look very differently at my private water supply in future. Thank you, Sophie. Okay, good stuff. Right, we're now back into our next set of three panelists. So if we could have Sam Parsons of Balcaskie, and Sam's due extra credits because he had to step in rather late in the day because Toby Anstruther, who was going to be speaking, couldn't come. So Sam, can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Debbie. I feel slightly underqualified for this, so I apologise in advance. I manage the Balcaskie estate, a very typical rural, mostly farming estate in the East Neuk of Fife. We cover around 4,500 acres, and we've got about 100 properties on the place, 60 of which are residential and 40 are commercial. Our place in this, and possibly the reason for us being involved in this meeting, is really down to the objectives of the estate to create habitat. And obviously that's usually used to sort of describe creating place for wildlife and biodiversity. But here it is actually about as much about people as it is about biodiversity, and creating a place that people want to live and work. And in 2012, we started our first commercial renovation, building a children's nursery. And we've now got a whole sort of raft of different commercial spaces, from storage workshops through to studios, offices, food production places, events, and a pub. And in all of that, what it's done is it's shown us that there's no such thing as community. There are communities, and there are communities of place and communities of interest. And we're part of that mix in a rural area, and understanding that there's a completely different need for one community to another, but there are some common themes. And one of the things that we noticed, which has developed, is our engagement within that community has grown. And so our understanding of issues, or it can be slightly polarizing with land ownership in Scotland. And I think that we're starting to understand where some of those rubs come from. So going to the, how do we actually deal with this? A lot of it started with old disused farm buildings, which we no longer needed for the farming business. We didn't want to convert them into houses, and we wanted to convert them into what is a sort of proxy for energy and resilience in a local area, which is employment. And having, in 2008, I think there were 6 people employed on the estate, and now, including the jobs created in the business units, I think there's 109 people working on or from the estate. And that in itself is a significant shift, and that by no means we're not finished yet. There's a lot left to do, but that's a real success in people's ability to live and work locally. And gone are the days of people having to travel to sort of more urban areas to work. And I think, I don't want to be the first to mention it, but COVID has changed people's perception of working from home and the professionalism in doing so. So from our first step into this really was when we lost the ability to reclaim VAT on renovation of listed buildings. When that went, we started looking at other ways of trying to, because we're working on small margins, we started to look at other ways of doing it, and that was why commercial buildings came to the forefront. Economically, it's probably arguably a better return and is less restrictive at the moment. The key for us is finding a key tenant for each of the sites, somebody who will lead the way, because we try and cluster like-minded occupiers together. So we have food sites, we have creative sites, that sort of thing. And finding somebody who has got enough vision to look at a knackered old building and understand that one day it will all look beautiful. But that community that was described earlier, actually, I think by Ian, about creating a space where people work together has been extremely valuable. I've been asked to come up with one thing that I would like to have changed, or what change it would be. So since nobody can interject, I've got 2. The first one is VAT again, which I know is a difficult one to do in Scotland, but actually renovation of old buildings should be seen every bit as importantly as recycling single-use plastic bottles, and it should be treated in the same way, whereas allowing an advantage in rebuilding or building new over and above renovating old seems mad. And the second thing is, I really think that we should start to see more use of renewable, and if you actually look on the top left, you'll see a picture of sheep. I definitely would like to see wool used in insulation, and that be mandated in Scotland that Scottish wool should go into Scottish insulation. Thank you very much. I've run over.
That's super, Sam. Thank you very much. No, I think you've come in quite nicely there. So thank you. Interesting. If anyone else listens to Out of Doors on a Saturday morning, as in most of the population of Scotland and New Zealand and Canada, by the looks of it, there was somebody being interviewed saying that it costs them £1.50 to shear a sheep, and they can only get £1 for the fleece. So that made me think immediately, Sam, of what you've just been saying about the wool situation. And NPF 4 is very much against demolition of buildings, so your VAT thing would tie in well to that. Good stuff. Thank you very much, Sam. Really helpful and challenging. So let's move on to Neil Sutherland, who's the founder and director of MACR and also involved in Highlands Rewilding.
Yeah, good afternoon, folks, and thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, this afternoon I may not be 5 minutes, but representing Highlands Rewilding Limited. It's a new company with a new landowning model. What we're interested in is nature recovery and community prosperity at scale in Scotland. We're a land owning and management organisation with at the moment three properties. I'm actually a non-executive director and board member, and the company's only been in existence for around 3 years. The three properties involved at the moment are Bunloit above Loch Ness, Beldorney in Aberdeenshire near Huntly, and newly acquired Tavialach in Argyll. The three properties run to about 6,500 acres. And really, the motivation for us is in the title, really. It's regeneration of these areas, nature recovery, and climate action, and opportunities to engage much more directly with these places, through communities. Now, we have I suppose one of the characteristics of the organisation is its unique funding strands. So there are three of these. I'll just work through them because there's a sort of theme in what I want to say here, which is around about funding and how we view assets, I suppose. So the first funding strand of the company is citizen rewilding or crowdfunding. So we launched this back in December, and it's doubled the target. We had a target of £500,000 of funds. You can starting at £50 and going upwards. And at the moment, there are 600 investors, and about 40% of them are in Scotland. The second strand is our founding funders, who are business leaders, like foundations and trusts, and people who are very keen on the kind of theme on rewilding, nature recovery. And then the third strand is institutions, and we feel to work at scale, we need to pull in banks and insurance companies and others, endowment funds and this type of thing. The first two I explained have been quite successful. We're still working hard to kind of pull in these bigger funds, but we feel that these guys will come to the party at some time when they realise that they need to divest from oil and gas and other damaging sectors and actually join the natural capital movement in that sense. So the conventional land management model that we're kind of used to, be it farming, well, agriculture, let's call it, or forestry, its success is usually defined by how few people are involved in it. And that's been going on for quite a long time now. And what we aim to do with Highlands Rewilding is to flip that over. There's much to do to address the hundreds of years of ecological damage in Scotland. It's not a thing, and I was told to be provocative, so that's what I'm going to be. You know, those of us that look at these bare hills realise what's happened over the past few hundred years, and it's time that we faced up to it and address these issues, be it science through verification of biodiversity increase or carbon increase, or its rangers developing people's understanding of these places, or other opportunities. There's lots to do, and Ariane covered quite a kind of range of different restoration opportunities, peatlands and woodland in the right place, and this type of thing. So this is really quite important. We're also dedicated as an organisation to work very closely with communities. That's something which will evolve in different ways in different places across our interests, but we're very keen to offer opportunity and security for people, communities, to allow things to build over time. And one of those opportunities clearly is housing. The other one is opportunities around skills development and just security over land itself. So we're looking to offer opportunities in that respect. So with all these people that are about to descend into places that are relatively quiet at the moment, perhaps, what kind of content and expression does that have? How do we build a kind of a unique way of responding to this? You won't be surprised to hear, those of you that know me, that I believe that perhaps sheep's wool has a place, but as a niche, I think that's one thing. But timber really, timber in all its uses is really the mainstream material that we need to respond to. And again, we have a supply chain with gaps. So anything sophisticated that we need for a digitally enabled biogenic technical approach to fantastic quality houses and other buildings actually needs a kind of a supply chain which is more locally grounded. So I think, you know, what we absolutely need is a roadmap to this. So timber is the key source for that, and we actually need investment, again, funding, to actually develop what we need in these areas, be it insulation or engineered products or high quality components. Most of these things that cost money, large amounts of money get spent out of the region, and we need to retain that economic potential within the region. So just to kind of finish off, so we feel that there are two particular strands talking about actual delivery. We don't believe that the future, in terms of the kind of progress that SEDA members and the organisation have made in recent decades, we don't believe this is a design or technical issue anymore. We feel we've actually achieved most of that. Really, what it is other things. It's about a funding model. We have to find ways to actually pull in, just as Highlands Rewilding is doing, institutional funds, large funds that actually value assets for longevity and high quality outcomes. So I haven't said anything about what the places may look like, but Ariane covered that, and I'm sure we can cover that in the chat. But the provocation for me, I suppose, to leave you with is we need to think about the fact that a lot of projects stall because they don't get funded properly. And we need to think about innovative ways to kind of deal with that. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Neil. So you didn't manage to speak too much about Macker, although I think you were bringing that in, but we'll cover that off during the, presumably get a chance to talk about that during the question and answer. So we're moving on to Ewan McLaughlin, Development Officer from Assynt Development Trust. Ewan, can I hand over to you?
Of course you can. Let me just tell you, I'm also with the Northwest 2045, and I've just put links to the chat, into the chat there for both ADT, that's the Assynt Development Trust, and the Northwest 2045. If we can have my first slide, please. Right. 1965, the then Secretary of State for Scotland, Willie Ross, when launching the Highlands and Islands Development Board, remarked, "We have 9 million acres where 225,000 people live, and we're short of land. Land is the basic natural resource of the Highlands, and any plan for social and economic development would be meaningless if proper use of land were not part of it." Fast forward nearly 60 years, and the problem of land ownership and access to it for development is still a problem, not just in Highland and Island communities, but also down in Dumfries and Galloway and the borders, where we've become accustomed to exporting our children to the Central Belt and Firth in order for them to find attainable housing, and we're lucky, meaningful jobs. Here in the Northwest, we're facing a slate of crises: housing, public transport, childcare and digital exclusion. According to the Hutton Institute, we face losing more than a quarter of our working age population by 2046. That means losing more schools, public utilities and services, and leaving people free views of an amazing landscape populated mostly by the affluent elderly and their live-in carers. The 2011 census had Assynt roughly with about 30% of our homes down as second homes. In the 12 years since then, we've seen a massive spike in house prices and sales out with local pockets, fueled by the enormous increase in visitors from the likes of Airbnb and, of course, the North Coast 500 driving route. The last time a young Assynt couple could afford to buy a home locally was in 2014. Recently, we've seen a 3-bedroom croft house with lovely views go for 1.2 million. It's now a holiday home over the border in Coyach. A friend recently sold his former telephone exchange, a shed measuring all of 15 square metres for £42,000. At £2,500 per square metre, it's probably one of the most expensive buildings in Scotland. If you look at the next slide, if we can bring that up, you'll see that in 2021, Highland Council recorded 1,535 house completions. These were mostly in the Greater Inverness area, where property developers have the luxury of building side-by-side pretty houses on generally flat, formerly agricultural land. In the face of a climate crisis, you'll excuse me for thinking that's a bit nuts when we should be using agricultural land for food production and building new houses and improving infrastructure in the rural. Anywho, back to 2021. In around Inverness, there were roughly 1,000 new houses built. In Sutherland, where I live, by comparison, there were 26, of which 22 were on the East Coast. In North and West Sutherland, the 4 new builds consisted of 1 residential and 3 holiday homes. Building 1,000 houses in and around Inverness is great, but 1,000 homes built across the North and West Highlands would be utterly transformational. So what can we do when those authorities that are supposed to help have their hands shackled by either a lack of urgency or, more likely, a lack of funding, and to a greater extent have passed the buck in a downwards direction? Here in the Northwest, we're tired of pleading for help, tired of watching families having to move away. We've been left with no other option than to do it for ourselves. That doing falls mostly on the shoulders of volunteers. Access to land is still an issue. Thankfully, in 2020, after much community consultation, we successfully applied to the Scottish Land Fund and purchased 55 acres of boggy, rocky, former glebe land, less than a mile from the village of Lochinver, from the Church of Scotland. It has beautiful views of Sylvan and Canisp. The site comes with a variety of difficulties, but the infrastructure is sadly lacking and will have to be done right. Early site visitors with professionals brought forth sighs and dismay at likely costs. The undercurrent belief then was, build them cheap, it will solve some of the problems. That kind of short-term make-do thinking has to end. Instead, we talked among ourselves and with others in the Northwest 2045 group and worked out that what we needed was a smart township, like a Clachan model, bigger, that could act as an exemplar to other rural communities in Scotland. Incidentally, it was recorded in the Napier Commission in the 1880s by one crofter that at one time there were over 100 townships in Assynt. Today we've got 17. So yes, the site is difficult, but why should our residents settle for less? We're looking at ways to think creatively to build near passive homes, renewable energy via hydro and solar, exploring multi-generational co-housing with shared utilities, off-site parking with electric charging for both cars and bikes, also an electric cart to help with deliveries. I can never understand why developers are so desperate to use up space for parking rather than expanding homes or gardens. We want to encourage self-builders. We'll do the infrastructure, you build a home and help become part of our community. After tackling our first priority of helping Assynt residents who are living in caravans, sometimes 2 to 3 generations under one roof, we'll be looking to use the next phase in partnership with the Assynt Foundation to attract the entrepreneurial self-starters, folk with transferable skills who need a place to work and live, be that office-based work or working with their hands. We're planning on a community hub that's going to have fibre speed broadband, or more likely Starlink, offices and meeting spaces, but more importantly, workshop facilities where people can make, do and train others. Additionally, we're also thinking of storage for those in business. From an educational perspective, we're looking to a network of nature trails that link up via a bridge with the primary school in Pulagh Loch, an outdoor learning centre, woodland crofts, etc. The news that the Scottish Government are planning on doubling council tax for short-term let property developers should help to ease some of the burden on our communities. Can I have the next slide, please? And stop complaints from buy-to-let property speculators that they cannot find local folk to do their changeovers on a Saturday morning and are having to bring in an expensive army of Mrs. Mops from Inverness by minibus. My provocations are simple. Local authorities have to second planners to community housing developments to avoid duplication, consultancy costs, and ensure the process flows and scale. Too often we're told the expense of building in the rural is prohibitive. Yet here in the northwest, we have plans for housing in Coyack, Assynt, Scourie, Kinlochbervie, Durness and Tongue, all in a similar time frame. We need to build them to scale and create employment and training opportunities for our young. I'll stop there. 300 seconds doesn't begin to scratch the surface of the housing crisis in rural Scotland. Jings, I haven't even mentioned ransom strips. Thank you.
Ewan, thank you very much. And in some ways, I think we've had a lot of positivity and significant challenge from you there, but some great solutions as well. So building at scale in rural Scotland, that's something to discuss shortly. It's good to see all the questions and things flooding in. I can also see people answering the questions already. That's you're a very helpful bunch, but no, that is super. It's good to see that discussion, and we will be capturing that. So that's all our panelists, unless I've missed anybody. So we all get a bit of a breather now while we do another poll, and then we've got a lovely musical piece. So shall we do poll number 3, please? So what should we value most about Scotland's rural areas? And select as many as you want in the order you prefer. And there are 9 options. Good stuff. We'll all take a little breather while that's happening. That's very interesting watching. Good stuff. I'm fairly magnetized by that poll, but let's keep moving on. So we're now going to play our musical contribution of the event with Sophie Bancroft, a song she wrote about love of home, whether it's the country she lives in, the village she lives in, her house or her family or friends, all home. Thank you very much, Sophie.
Thank you.
I was raised from the ground by your loving hand, with a spirit of old, your heart in the land, and I breathe the sea with its wild caress, and I know that I am home, and I know that I am home. I can drink from a burn on your mountain steep, on the purple laced hill I take my sleep. I feast my eyes where the eagles soar, and I know that I am home, and I know that I am home. And there's gold in them there hills, and black diamonds lie in the seam, and there's always summer high above the clouds, where the snow may melt your dreams. If I'm lost, I'm found when I reach your shore. When the wind lifts my sail, you send me an oar, and your forest green will shelter me, and I know that I am home, and I know that I am home. And there's gold in them there hills, there's always summer high above the clouds, where the snow may melt your dreams. If I cover my ears, I still hear your song, and with eyes wide shut, I see where I belong, in this mountain land where the deer run free, and I know that I am home, and I know that I am home.
Beautiful, Sophie. Thank you so much. I used to live in East Lothian, not too far from Pathhead, so I recognise some of those landscapes. So that's made me quite nostalgic. Sophie, can we hear that on? Is it online somewhere?
Yes, it is on. It's on my YouTube channel. Which, sorry, wasn't playing. Didn't seem to be working earlier on, but yes, it's on my YouTube channel.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to that on repeat. That was really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Good stuff. Well, it looks as if what we should value most about Scotland's rural areas is community, followed by biodiversity, and then potential to provide high quality of life. Fourth is potential to contribute to Scotland's economy. And I think that's actually very interesting as we go through all these debates about what should our economy be most based on? How do we transition justly? Ariane raised quite a lot of interesting thoughts there around community wealth building. And in a sense, a lot of our panelists are actually experimenting with that kind of activity as well in different angles. So excellent panel. Thank you all very much for your contributions so far, but probably now is when the hard work really starts for you. So what I would be interested in first is if the panel could all put their videos back on. And I wondered if anyone in the panel had an immediate question for one of their fellow panelists. So it sounds a bit Hunger Games, so be kind to each other. Ariane, go ahead. Who do you want to
Okay, I'll come up with a spontaneous question there because I so going back to Craig McLaren's wonderful introduction around kind of placemaking. Craig, you said that we need an NPF4 is going to support us in this, develop land in the long-term public interest. And I would be interested to hear a little bit more about, if you could unpack that a little bit more. What do you think, from your perspective, do we need to be focusing on there?
Thanks for that, Ariane. That's a nice and easy one to answer. I suppose we're still going through the ideas of what this could look like, but I said in my my presentation that one of the things I think we really need to look at is how we can work early on what good looks like and what we want, and bring together a lot of different people who have a stake in a particular area to make that happen. So I'm a great believer in having a much more front-loaded planning system, one where we have those discussions, we establish the vision, we look at the options, we look at the opportunities, we look at the constraints, we look at the context, and we ask ourselves some hard questions as to what things could look like. And from there, try and build a consensus for what the vision would be. And then I think the important bit is to get the route map to see how actually we could build that. And that route map, I think, is important because that will allow us to work out where resource comes from, which is a big issue, wherever you are. It could give us a programme, it could allow us to monitor and report on that, and it would give us an indication as to what progress is actually being made. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I think this idea of long-term public interest involves a discussion about the long-term involving the public and all the different aspects of it, if that makes some sense.
Can I just come back and ask a supplementary, as MSPs do? We learn how to do this at committee, and Craig has been at my committee, which is always great. So yes, okay, that's kind of like the broad brushstrokes, but what do we, and community engagement, but I'm aware that community engagement is really difficult to do. So what do we need? And I know we've already got the challenge of needing 700 new planners that have that ecological biodiversity understanding as well. But now I think what you're talking about here is that we also need people who have that kind of connects back to something I was saying, which is that soft skill infrastructure of being able to facilitate those processes, because we are going to need to have them. I mean, what you were saying, I kind of feel like what I brought in with the kind of how do we make those villages or those communities, kind of full featured. We need those facilitators. It seemed that that's a whole other kind of green skill job, my sense is. And so just if you could go in a little bit more detail there, of like, how are we practically doing, getting that route map, getting that vision established, etc.
Yeah, I think you're right about the need for this sort of facilitator. I do think that's a skill planners have, to be honest with you. It's probably under-recognised by some people, but that's what we try and do. We work with a range of different people to try and develop a vision for a place. So I do think that's there, but as you say, I think one of the issues we've got is that there is a resourcing crisis in planning, no doubt about that, and your committee's been very good in supporting that message, so thanks once again for that. And I think one of the issues with that is what's happening with planners just now is they're being focused on the issues which they have to deal with, the statutory aspects of planning. So as the process in the planning application, it's even delivering not delivering a development plan, but actually making a development plan. And the delivery side of it and is the bit which is missing as well. I say often that planners can provide a vision, but they can't always deliver that vision. And I think that's what the issue is. It's the idea of trying to make sure we can bring the people in who own the land, the people who have the resources, the people who can help develop the infrastructure, be that soft or harder infrastructure or green infrastructure, to try and to break those log jams, because just now we can have all the visions we want, but we don't have a sort of resource programme to back that up. And there are examples of where that happens. I think in Ireland, again, you've heard me talk about the National Planning Framework in Ireland. They have a capital investment programme that goes alongside it, not just in urban context, but in the rural context as well, as a rural development programme goes along with it. So something which changes that sort of dynamic, I think, would be a useful way of trying to make things happen.
Thank you very much, Craig. Ariane, we've actually got one for you. Well, Craig's probably thinking of a few for you now that you've brought him in nicely there. So we've got a question in the chat. It would be great to try and get some investment to kickstart a local wood fibre insulation industry. And this would be a good fit with other forestry products utilising waste wood. And there's mention of Stico Pavatex. And Andy James is asking how this might be achieved. Ariane, have you thoughts on that?
I think I'm still learning some aspects of that. And I think Neil talked about these interesting aspects of funding. But I have actually been speaking to the forestry sector, commercial forestry sector, because it is going to be a massively growing sector. And I think, Neil was just beginning to kind of touch on the potential there. So I think that some of what I understand from the forestry sector is we need better indication from government so that the sector has that confidence and so that investors have confidence in those kinds of innovations. So it's something that needs to happen at a level of government where an indication of really supporting the kind of forestry sector to plant trees in the right place, absolutely, but also be able to kind of upscale and kind of really roll out what they're just sitting on and waiting to do. So I would say that's it, is kind of signaling the government needs to signal to make investment better in our timber and the right products that we might make from that.
Thank you. There's also a suggestion stroke question as a follow-on to that, where Tish has said the French government mandated that all new public buildings need to use at least 50% natural insulation, and shouldn't we be doing something similar in Scotland?
Yes, I made a note of that one. You'll be glad to know. I also made a note of the VAT piece that Sam was talking about. I always bring up the VAT piece, Sam. It's absolutely outrageous, that bit, but of course it's a UK government piece, and I made the note about wool insulation, but I also take Neil's point about that maybe not being the place to go. And I know that in terms of wool, Certainly I've listened to Out of Doors as well, and I heard the person who was being interviewed in that segment, and she was talking about people looking at it being something that might be used as soil enhancement. So that might be the way to go to that. That's the thing, isn't it? We're going to take all our incredible resources that nature provides for us, and then just deciding at this point in time with this urgency, where's the right use for each of these things.
So, Neil, you've got your hand up. Have you thought of a difficult question for one of your fellow panelists? Remember, they can get in you in a minute too.
Well, I was just going to add a comment, I guess, on the whole wood fibre thing, because that's one of my kind of areas that I've delved into perhaps more than anything else. So there is a rumour that Suprema, one of the big French component manufacturer suppliers, is keen on setting up a plant in Galloway or in the south of Scotland. And so we're probably going to see that. What we've got to remember is Scotland has 2/3 of the standing timber resource of the UK. It's often used for low-grade uses. We're still importing 80% of our construction timber, only second to China. Okay, so that's the scale of the issue. So a lot of the materials we have are perfectly usable for a lot of higher grade uses. A lot of very valuable materials for building longevity housing, which is one of the points I was trying to get across, and housing that's not designed for a 50-year life and then it's replaced, but for 100, 150, 200-year life, is built from the very things we're talking about: wood fibre, hygroscopic materials that don't degrade over time through moisture movement. It's moisture that kills buildings. We absolutely need this kind of infrastructure in some of these key areas, and we're very, very well placed to with our forestry stock to actually respond to this. And what we're doing is we're taking the economic potential and it's leaking out, directly leaking out back over to Europe or wherever it is that all these sophisticated things come from. We don't have a roadmap and vision to how we get to 2030 or heaven knows 2045 net zero by using our own resources, and we simply have to do this now. It's as simple as that. So if anyone wants to join me, get in touch and we develop a movement around this. We do need political support, but we need investment from business as well. We need the Scottish National Investment Bank. We need various other mechanisms to come in here now and actually, but we have to get out there and ask for it, frankly.
I think that's an enormously useful challenge. I can certainly see Ariane scribbling away. So if anybody else has any more challenges for Ariane, we do lose her potentially for a vote in Parliament at 50:30. So feel free. Sorry, Ariane, but it's great to have you here and great to have you scribbling. We like to see that. Does anyone else have a comment or question in the panel on materials and building and construction? Anything you want to add at the minute, because we're going on that road for the minute, and then I'll change tack. And I can't necessarily see you, so please just, the panel, please unmute and ask.
I can come in with a comment on the back of what Neil was saying, because again, talking to the commercial forestry sector, what Neil's talking about is the specification, and I always get them muddled up, so Neil, you can correct me. So there's C16 and there's C24. And we tend to specify, I think, C24, and what we grow in Scotland is C16, or it's the other way around. But Neil is nodding, so I think I've got it the right way. So I've actually started to have conversations with, I'm trying to initiate conversations, because if we're training people at the level of architectural engineer or architect, or to specify for keeping on specifying timber that we need to bring from Europe, that doesn't make sense. So even if we can move to a place where we're actually educating people, or also when people have to, I think people have to take professional development upgrades and things like that, and start to divert them to actually using timber that we're growing in Scotland. I feel like that's a good intervention point. So I've taken that away, and I am working on that piece.
Good stuff. There is a lot about materials in the chat, so people feel free to just scroll through there and grab anything that you're interested in, because the incredible wealth of knowledge in our audience and on our panel today. So I'm going to turn now to hubs, and Ian, I'm talking slowly to get you warmed up. So we've got some good questions for you. So the hubs in Northumberland and Sussex look swish and state of the art. One of our questions asks, are they expensive to build and or renovate? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And I think you've done some answering of that in the chat, but if you could just give us a little bit more commentary on that.
Yeah, I may have fallen victim to putting forward the sort of prime examples I could think of and ignoring the more kind of everyday examples that I could have put on, which might not have necessarily been as provoking as such. But there's many examples of communities or public sectors, or even private sectors in some instances, of using buildings that already have a function in the community. Pubs in particular are looking at, and pubs and village halls, I would say, are the two that are looking for activities to do during the day as a reason to be open. And co-working spaces in pubs is definitely a growing trend. Pubs can either sort of charge a small entry or rely on the sales from food and drinks, and cafes as well. I think on the placemaking side of things as well, and something that I didn't really touch on in my initial introduction, was the role that these hubs can play in providing other services to the communities as well, that isn't necessarily like a business function, which is their primary function. So there's some really good examples in Wooler, which isn't too far from the border, which is a really strong self-help community in Northumberland, and their enterprise hub provides things like library services, broadband connections, places for people to come and sort of learn skills around language. They have the job centre, they have citizens advice, they have doctors coming in and doing drop-in sessions as well from the hub. So this is, what typically would have been community assets in terms of like a community centre or a village hall or something like this, wrapped up under a new sort of primary motivation of helping to support businesses. And again, I think that it's important to emphasise that if we are thinking about place building, of having physical spaces still, as we move more and more into a digital world, it's important to keep hold of the physical assets that bring us together. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ian. I've got a follow-on for you as well, which moves on from and interested the mix of activities and uses that you can have in a hub. So Laurie Carruthers is asking, interesting idea of the co-living from SRUC's Ian Merrill. From looking at the poll, I'm sure we'll see how important housing is just now in rural Scotland. Do you know of any examples or any ideas for how to potentially combine enterprise hubs and housing?
Yeah, so I put a couple of links in there. At the minute, I would say that this is more of an idea than an actual reality at the minute. In the UK and Scotland, Spain are leading the way at the minute, and they are well positioned in terms of being like quite a hot country to try and attract this kind of digital nomad that we're seeing as a growing trend. People who like to travel the world and stay in certain places for a few months at a time, let's say, and work there remotely. I think that there could be something there. We were up in Tornagrain quite recently looking around there, and it has some interesting ideas around being able to attract a new community to it, and also providing all of that infrastructure in one place to be able to maintain that people stay there, but also give them the opportunity to, say, for example, commute into Inverness and work from there, but also just providing that infrastructure for people to be able to live in the town and work in the town, which isn't quite a rural co-living, co-working setup, but it's on a sort of like on the next scale up from that. But yes, if we're looking for good examples, there are plenty of good examples in Spain who are somewhat leading the way on this at the minute.
Thank you for that. Ewan, can I just bring you in?
Sure. For those of us who were down at Dunkeld for the Rural Housing Conference, we managed to meet with two chaps from Ireland's National Hub Network. And the difference is that we're talking about communities doing this, whereas in Ireland, the government are doing it. They've connected smart hubs along the west coast. They've called it the Atlantic Economic Corridor. And there's co-working hubs, community enterprise hubs, research and development. They've done 400 hubs with high-speed broadband in 4 years and created a desk capacity of about, I think it was 22,000. So we're light years from that. And what we should be doing is, when I mentioned scale earlier on, is we should be looking to government to think, well, there's an exemplar that works. This is connecting people who've got dodgy Wi-Fi, who are in the rural. I mean, there was a lovely example of one of the islands where they'd managed to bring folk, they managed to get the hub sorted. Previously, it meant that if the ferry was off, people couldn't do work, but now they've got high-speed broadband, they can work in their hub. That's the only comment I wanted to make on it, because I just think we've really missed the trick here, and we should be looking to elsewhere for those kind of exemplars.
And Ariane has popped a question in the chat for you now, Ewan, on whether, oh, and I've just lost it, but she's asking about what the Irish government budget was for the hubs.
Oh, they did it in a packet of potatoes. That was it, you know.
Ooh,
They obviously, no.
Controversial.
Hardly. You want controversy? No. They basically budgeted it. They looked at the economic development impacts of it and realised that these were areas that were completely lacking, that were stagnant in their economy, and it's a cheap way of doing it. They were reconditioning buildings. They were building new ones. They were working with local communities. It really, I mean, I'll send you the video of it. It's really quite impressive what they've done. And we should be looking to what they've done and doing the same.
Good stuff. If you can find the video, you can pop it in the chat, but not want to distract you at the minute. Ariane, you've got a hand up. Have you a further question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a bit more detail, because we have some opportunity right now, because we have a First Minister who said he's going to do rural, support more rural housing, but I think we need that other intervention that's, been so well articulated in terms of how do we bring people together and support business innovation. So if you have contacts of those two people you met, that would be brilliant, because then if I can have a number, right, everything works with numbers for budgets and stuff, we might have an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
And the video.
I think media. I've got Sam with his hand up. Sam.
Yeah, sorry, I can't find the hand up button. Ariane, before you have to disappear, I do have a question. Obviously, we're looking at, so far, discussion's been on new build. What stage do you feel we're at with the future facing rural housing, with the houses that will not reach the energy performance certificates for letting? And I ask that question because a lot of those rural houses are affordable rent houses. You can argue that they're unaffordable energy consumption, but right now there'll be an increasing number of houses which will be removed from the rental market because there's no justification for the spend to bring them up to scratch. Now, that's not because there's not willingness, but we are heading towards an issue, and I just wonder what you feel about that.
I agree with you that we're heading towards an issue, and I just had a conversation with somebody who actually lives in a list building, not in a rural town, right? Who asked me very much the same question. So it is a conversation that I have with the Green Minister Patrick Harvey, and I think he's been a bit focused more on the current housing bill at the moment and getting that through. But it is something that I am making quite a bit of noise about. But I would say that also I think the Existing Homes Alliance is doing very good work on that, and I would say that's more for so that's for kind of private homes that are privately owned homes. But what they're trying to do, and again, trying to get the government to support some kind of fund that will help people move through that process of fabric first approach where possible, kind of assessing what's possible, and then looking at what kind of change in the heating system can be. But I know it is a really massive and difficult issue, and I think it's quite right that you bring up the point that it's going to just add more pressure to our housing issues rurally if we can actually, if they end up being empty homes, which ironically the consultation that was introduced today is about taxing second and empty homes. But if they're empty because it's unaffordable to retrofit, that won't work.
Ariane, I'm conscious you're going shortly, and I did have a question I wanted to ask you about the facilitation side of things. Where do you see facilitation being most needed in rural areas?
I think it's kind of everywhere I turn. I feel like there's, you know, so there's in situations like Ewan said that he's part of Northwest 2040, I think 2045, and you know, that's an example of lots of different organizations who own land being brought together to look at this much bigger approach to landscape scale land management. And that's kind of what Neil was also touching on, that we need to kind of approach this, all of the work that we need to be doing needs to be much bigger. And in that context, we're going to be bringing people together that have maybe had up until now very different perspectives or ideas of an outcome. So facilitators who can do that. And I know Northwest 2045 had tremendous work with Annabelle Davison Knight, I think her name is, bringing everybody together and kind of getting down to the point where people could really work well. So that's one aspect, but I think there are others. And I think, I mean, I just think about, you think about a village that maybe up until now, I mean, it was lovely. Can't remember the person who read the poem right at the beginning, and he talking about his village. But I think, you know, you get a little bit bigger, and or you know, does everybody know everybody? Is everybody there for the common good of that village? And so when you get tensions with people having different agreements, different perspectives and disagreements, who's there to facilitate that process? And is it that we all actually need to develop that skill to facilitate what I call heat, because we are going to experience quite a lot of heat, I think, in the time to come, where we are not necessarily gracefully letting go of the current way that we live our lives and moving into the way that nature and climate is asking us to live our lives. So I think some of it is about facilitating ourselves, but some of it is about who do we bring in to facilitate the collective. So whether that's land or in neighborhoods, I think we need that work to be done. And I think, Craig, I agree with you. I think I went to a tremendous local development plan engagement session with Murray Planning Department, and they were brilliant, really, really good. So I think planners do have it, but there's not enough of them. And I think it's something that we need.
Thank you very much, Ariane. I think I agree with you about Murray, because I think over quite a long period of time they've invested in things like working with Architecture and Design Scotland and building up their planners' skills in all of these areas. And I think that's what we need. I betray my profession here now, but that's what we will need going forward into a new world of planning. It's got to be about facilitation and balance and but proactivity from planners as well. Thank you very much. Just while we're on planning, I do have some questions. Craig, if you can be warmed up and ready for that. So there's a question about young people here. So planning over the years has used so much energy on dealing with objectors. How can we more effectively encourage and give younger people who need housing a voice in the planning system? Craig, you want to comment, and then anyone else on the panel, just let me know if you want to comment too.
It's a very good point, because I always get frustrated by the fact that the way most people engage with the planning system is to tell us what they don't want. and we need to flip that to get people to tell us what they do want. And that's why, at the risk of repeating what I've said earlier, this idea of early engagement and think about place, not just about planning, which is quite a dry term, I know, and quite a contested term for people as well. But if you talk about place and what you want to do with that place, that gives you a better frame for the discussion. So I think that's the type of way we should be doing that. There are quite a lot of ways in which a number of authorities have been doing a lot of work with young people on that and asking them what places they want to look at. I know a number of authorities just now are trying to look at how they do their local development plans specifically with and for young people, because they are the audience for a development plan in many ways as well. So this idea of place, this idea of attachment to that place, this idea of what you want for the place, and this idea of having a vision, as I've said already, I've said this several times already this afternoon, but the vision and the route map I think is incredibly important. And one thing I would say is we've got beyond the situation where most planners used to engage in a drafty church hall on a Wednesday night with a couple of flip charts, to much more sophisticated ways of doing things. And I think one of the interesting things that happened during COVID was that we found some of the demographics around engagement changing because things had went online, and it wasn't the sort of, how can I put it without being rude, but the usual suspects in many ways who went along to time to go along to a church hall on a Wednesday night, get involved in things, to people who whose time was a bit more precious and who wanted to engage in a different way through online stuff. We found it was a young family that was perhaps engaging in this. It was more young people were engaging with it as well. So this blended sort of face-to-face and online approach is a way in which we can try and facilitate that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out, because young people's engagement within the planning system is something which was, I think, one of the key themes in many ways of the new Planning Act. So I think this will come to the fore as we see more and more of that happening in new development plans coming into place as well.
Just commenting on that, my own perspective as well is that bringing one of the projects I've worked on is Findressy, which is a northern extension to Elgin, and the Piggaveny Farms there, who were the owners of the land and were leading on that particular development. What they did is they wove a lot of their consultation in with things they were doing already on the farm, such as community open days and a schools program, an amazing schools program with the local high schools, where they would have these days and lots of different stations around the farm where pupils and their teachers could come and find out about different elements of the running of a farming business. And one of those was the new Findressy development and what that would, how that would progress and how that would look. So over the years, many children from the local school got to know about how we need housing, why do we need housing, how can we design it well, how can we think hard about all of these things. So I think there is some really exciting work happening out there with involving young people from quite an early stage about understanding these things.
The one thing we're trying to do as well with that, with Debbie, is shift it from just being engagement to actually to get them to think about planning as a profession, which meets one of the other things we've looked at as well. So it's they get that initial taster for it, and then they can think about, okay, this is what it's about. Maybe I want to be involved in actually helping to facilitate that in the future.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of good, interesting work is happening around apprenticeships and new entry levels, new ways into the planning profession and surveying profession as well. We're doing quite a lot of work on that in Savills, trying to identify socioeconomic groups who don't consider the property as a profession. Anyway, moving on. I'm sorry, Craig, but I've still got them for you. I think others involved in development must have more agency in planning. This could meet the shortfall in officers. Determination is too focused on teams that are unaccountable and distant from the community. Any comments on that?
I'm not quite sure what I understand by agency within it, if that means taking planners away. I think we do have an issue within the profession with, in the past, a lot of planners would do, at the start of their career, get involved in a local authority and get a sort of grounded base for that. And we're seeing probably less of that happening, probably more attractive jobs in the private sector with some of the sort of sexier project-based stuff. But also there's an issue with morale in our public sector just now. And I've quoted the figures already today about how we've lost a quarter of our planners in the last sort of 14 or 15 years. that in itself is causing an issue. And as I again mentioned earlier on, what's happening is the focus has been that we have to put our planners into the real statutory based stuff, and some of this softer stuff around the sides, which I think is we're probably agreeing where a lot of real added value comes from, is being lost and can't be done because there's too many people having to spend their time focusing on processing a planning application or producing a development plan, and that goes back to perhaps the failing of remoteness from the planning officer, because they don't have the time to engage in communities. To be honest with you, they're doing much more around the sort of the process-based work, which is a shame. We need to have more people to do that more fully rounded and holistic work.
One suggestion I also have for you, Craig, the Scottish Awards for Quality in Planning. I think we need to introduce a category for best local authority officer, because we do come across some amazing planners and they get so much stick, but I do come across some folk really going above and beyond, really committed and engaged and interested. So I think we've got to encourage more of that behaviour with an award.
We have introduced in the RTPI Awards Chief Planning Officer of the Year Award and a Planning Authority of the Year Award, because I think the very thing you say, Debbie, is that there's a lot of people who get a lot of stick, to be honest with you, who aren't recognised and perhaps should be.
Thank you very much. Moving, it's a reasonable segue, I think, into community engagement. So Sam, we've got some questions for you, and I was really interested and intrigued by your kind of community engagement journey. So a question here, covering the presence of so many communities in one place was really interesting, but how did Balcaskie Estate go about engaging local East Neuk communities in its plans? Were there any struggles or successes?
Well, it sounds as though we had a sort of considered thought process and a well executed community consultation. We didn't at all. What we realised as we went along were just how many communities there were. And had we set out to have community consultation, we'd have gone to the local community council and assumed that was representative of our communities. Actually, what happened was early on, in fact, the children's nursery was our first insight into how many different communities we spanned, because the parents of that were, traveling to work, etc., etc. And through those conversations, we realised that there was an interest and a demand to live and work locally. Over time, we have very slowly and organically built the workshop spaces and studios and commercial development. We haven't necessarily done it with a long-term plan in place that we could present to somebody saying this is what we're going to do in the next 30 years. I think we're sort of closer to that now. We can show them what we've already done. The proof of concept is there. In terms of challenges, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first challenge I faced was trying to get change of business use from agricultural to commercial, and that was just met with a straightforward, the road network won't support it. And of course, it's very easy to be demoralised early on when you don't have a proven demand and you don't have the sort of enthusiasm of a list of tenants knocking on the door. And I think in a way that's a sort of question I've posed to Craig in there, is actually the scale of a lot of these developments that we're probably discussing here are very small, very complex, very time consuming for everybody. And I genuinely pity the planning department that we were involved with early on, because I was totally inexperienced with this, but it was so small they didn't justify bringing in the expertise to try and make it more palatable for the people who were trying to process it. And I think that's something we'll probably face across the whole of the rural sector, is that lots and lots of very small developments require a very different approach to few larger developments. And yet with a declining resource of planning officers, it's inevitably going to lead to simplification, streamlining, which is in direct contrast to what I think we're all talking about here.
I think it sums up beautifully that big challenge that quite often we say that sometimes doing a 1,500 house site isn't even as complicated as getting one house in the countryside. And I'm not really joking about that. Sometimes, just for a lot of different reasons, you end up dealing with incredible complications. And quite often it is someone quite junior in the team who's given the small jobs to do, struggles a bit, does their best. And then when they come to a senior to sign off their recommendation for approval, the senior spots all these issues, and we just end up in this quite messy situation. And that's quite often it's the small projects that don't get the skilled attention. So complete sympathy with you there, Sam. But incremental and organic, it sounds like a great way to do it, but I can see that that has held a lot of challenges. The engagement as well, really interesting, because there's a huge amount of encouragement to do more engagement and partnering with local communities, and it's really interesting to hear how that's evolved with you. So I'm not sure this is directly for you, but maybe you would want to comment, Sam. How can we ensure that new buildings and rural areas are given their own unique and vernacular identities to differentiate them from standard new homes, so that inhabitants have a greater sense of place? Have you any thoughts about that, and then anyone else on the panel?
Yeah, I mean, the danger is that if you look at a new build development, it's often built on least cost basis. But if you look at somebody's individual private house that they have put their heart and soul into, that's where you find the best design. So to try and create a little bit of that with the cost, you've got to have one eye on the costs. That's a real challenge. What I think there needs to be is a recognition where you can demonstrate that you have reflected and maintained, you sort of protected the rural vernacular, but where there's new build, it stands clearly as new build, but that new build needs to be justifiable in the materials it uses, the scale, the shape, the imprint, and all the other things that go with it. It doesn't really answer the question, but there's no point in us creating a whole load of Pantel, Crowstep, brand new builds here in Fife. We've got them already. What we want to do is actually frame them, celebrate them, and then build something which is suitable for the area now. Pantels were the cheapest product available because they were ballast on ships. They just happen to be, now we celebrate them as being beautiful architecture.
Very good point. Thank you very much. Neil, I wondered if you wanted to comment on that from your Macker perspective, potentially, and Highland Rewilding as well.
Yeah, I mean, the shift in construction has been significant, and Sam's done a very good job of describing the issues there. And I was cautioned to be positive, so I better not touch on the planning system. Because, well, I'll touch on it in so much as to answer the question, because if you consider that a vernacular is to do with what's available, what's in terms of materials, skills, and aspiration, in order to respond to the challenges of our time, net zero. And this economic transformation that Scotland's going through just now, although we're so close to it, it's difficult to see it. Our built infrastructure, our built environments has to fundamentally shift. It has to fundamentally change. The term I use is expression. So it's fundamentally different if you have a digitally enabled offsite process than if you're turning up on site and building in a conventional way. And I don't think the kind of system kind of recognizes that. There's been a few comments on the chat also about the kind of resistance from insurers, mortgage lenders, all kinds of, these guys are actually very much slowing down that whole evolution very often. And this has been discussed for quite some considerable time. At some point it becomes a political issue, but nobody seems to want to grapple with it. So we end up with confusion in that sense, Another sort of major issue that development falls into really is the fact that the allocation of development land is very large chunks, usually by the planning system that suits large developers, and it's very difficult for smaller organizations to get involved at all. And again, this probably comes back to Craig's point, there isn't the resource to kind of deal with these things. I don't know, I just worry that there's not enough agility within the system to respond to the very real challenges and opportunities of our time. That's the other way to look at it. But planning is so essential. It's just so incredibly important to making progress with building a better Scotland. So we need to keep grappling with it somehow. Anyway, that's a rambling response.
No, thank you very much for that. I had I've got lots of really interesting questions coming in, and then you all keep answering them for each other, so that's much appreciated. But I see Craig, is your hand up? Did you want to comment on something?
Yeah, it was just in the back of what Neil said there, and I've got a lot of sympathy with that. I think one of the important things we need to think about, I talk a lot, I'm contractually obliged to talk about the issues with resourcing and planning because it's such an important issue. But the other thing we need to build into this is an upskilling programme as well. There's more and more things being thrust upon to planners. There's more and more change happening more and more quickly. And one of the things we've been saying to Scottish Government is that in taking forward the National Planning Framework, you need to also have a workforce and upskilling strategy to go along with that. So it's not just bringing planners in, it's using existing planners and making sure the new planners have the skills and the agility, as Neil says, to try and take and deal with some of these newer issues as well. So that's as important as the resourcing issue.
So, Ewan, I had a question for you. Which was, you sound as if what you've been doing is you've been tackling the at scale question in a way, and one of the big struggles with particularly, let's move on to rural housing, though it would equally apply, I think, to rural hubs, is this lots and lots of small projects all over the place with everybody kind of reinventing the wheel and trying to upskill in it. What have you been doing in Assynt to kind of deal with that? Because it sounds as if you've thought about that and you've got a number of locations that you're thinking hard about.
Yeah, I mean, this comes out of the frustration that when we talk about rural housing, it's always in little pockets. And, the cliche I've been spitting out for the last couple of years is about 1,000 homes being transformational. Now, we can't do that ourselves. We need government backing, we need local authority to really get behind the idea, because particularly this area, and my colleagues all in the call will agree with me, that there's an incredible fragility here, that locals are priced out houses, the houses are not being replaced. We're looking at our first stage development, 10 houses, and that's to get people out of caravans or living 2-3 generations under one roof in an entirely inappropriate home. The second phase, in a partnership with the Assynt Foundation, will be looking to do hopefully 30 houses there. But we need to be able to really collate all of the various pockets of 10 here, 10 there, etc. And go to government, go to local authorities and say, look, we have this, they have the capacity here, but we also have to be able to make sure that it's a circular economy, that there's benefits in training and apprenticeships, because, we were talking about it the other day there, we want to make sure that we can get local plant hire people, that we can get local craftsmen involved, that we can use the community woodlands, that we can use, there's a quarry down at Leadmore. We want to use the resources we have here rather than importing from someone else's economy. So it kind of is a no-brainer. We look at I'm down to Edinburgh recently to visit my son, and I got the train over, and I was passing by Queensferry, and there was new developments there, cheek by jowl, these hideous ticky-tacky paper houses being built, to supply the workforce required in the Central Belt. And we're now in a different shift. We've now moved from that. We now know, with COVID, as was mentioned earlier on, remote working is the way ahead. So we want to be able to get away from this over-congested Central Belt and move north and south of the Central Belt to actually give people breathing space in the Central Belt. So on the question of scale, it's mostly just conversations we've had with the Northwest 2045 group. realizing the commonality of what we're all going through and seeing if we can actually, you know, raise awareness of it and shout out for our corner, fly the flag, so to speak.
That's definitely. Have you popped anything about Northwest 2045 in the chat, Ewan? Because I think
I put the link in when I started talking. Put the link in at first there. It's a collaboration of community trusts, private landowners, community landowners, and statutory authorities, the Northwest Highland Geopark, etc. And we've all come together because we're tired of seeing the wheel reinvented every decade or so. You know, we've got Scourie, we've got Kinlochbervie. We're exploring all sorts of ways to retain our people here and to encourage others to come. We've got lots of land, we just can't get access to it. But it's interesting what was been said earlier on about planning there. One of the things that really threw us was NPF4 and not having the compulsory sales order in that bill. That would have made such a difference to us, because despite the fact that we have community buyouts here, they are surrounded by ransom strips. And, you know, for example, you've got 40,000 acres up at the Assynt Foundation there, and where it is 40-something thousand, and there's one access road along a pothole road that locals don't visit because they're going to lose the sump off their car, or, you know, come and view our collection of artisanal potholes. There's a lot we really need to get done, and yeah, building to scale, and as I say, flying the flag for our corner is the best way to do it, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting. And again, there was, unfortunately, I think we're about to have to move on to our final items, but there was certainly a comment on land, and even local authorities to identify land in existing communities awarded self-outline planning permission and buy it up at existing use value. That's been commented on the land subject, and also just I kind of feel like public interest-led development has become very quiet lately, and yet that probably because of the big issues facing local authorities in trying to fund anything, never mind trying to buy up land and pre-service and all, and follow the German model. But you know, a lot of interesting work's been done on that, so definitely worth further thought and exploration. And I think we've got to wrap up. I can probably see Gail from SEDA tapping her virtual watch at me. We're moving on to Pauline Pryor-Pitt to read North Use 2020. Thank you so much, Pauline. Oh, you're still on mute.
Here we are.
There you are.
Okay.
There you are.
Okay, right, okay. I'm going to read you this poem, which is from my collection, which is called No Better Place, poems in English with Gaelic translations. And this poem was written during COVID, where the consensus was that because we live on an island miles out in the Atlantic, we couldn't be living in a better place during COVID. She stops jogging on the single track to talk at a distance, says how lucky we are. We couldn't be living in a better place. And she doesn't just mean wide skies, deserted shores where gulls swoop down like falling snow and greylags quarrel overhead. She doesn't just mean evenings, still as still, wind just stirring the marram, moonlight polishing the sea. And she doesn't just mean white bog cotton on the moor, irises in ditches, maca flowers, buttercups, daisies, harebells, orchids, primrose, clover, sundew, eyebright, locks reflecting ink blue light. She doesn't just mean the kindness of neighbours, single track roads with passing places, everyone waving, chatter in the co-op, wearing our masks, waiting for the papers. Is the ferry in yet? What about the weather? And she doesn't mean we don't all miss the clink of glass to glass, heaped up plates of neeps and tatties, Peggy addressing the haggis, young women cooking, serving and refilling, singing and dancing, pipes and fiddle and box, everyone knowing everyone else, the whole community celebrating. She means how lucky we are in these strange times, 30 miles out in the Atlantic. She means we couldn't be living in a better place.
Beautiful, Pauline. Thank you so much. Did you say which island you were on? I missed that bit. Or do you not
I'm
want
on
to
the-
disclose that?
Yes, I'm on the island of North Uist.
North Uist.
And I was very interested in, I've really enjoyed the conversations because a lot of it applies to where I live. And one of our greatest fears is becoming a rich man's holiday island, because people are buying up the place, but building houses and not living in them.
Pauline, that sounds like the subject of your next poem.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely beautiful way to bring us shortly to a close with one or two other items just to finish off. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
So sadly, with so much of the rural world still to set to rights, we have to conclude the event. I wish we had a real pub, not a virtual one anymore, to retire to and continue saving the planet and people in Scotland together. But just we don't. But I just do want to thank everyone who's participated, including the Open University of Scotland for sponsoring the Poem from Adulthood, and that was definitely last but not least. Our panelists, Craig McLaren, Ian Merrill, Ariane Burgess, Sam Parsons, Neil Sutherland and Ewan McLachlan. I think you were all absolutely fantastic contributors, and just so many lines of inquiry that are spiraling out of this, which you can see in the chat. The contributing artists, Frank Hambling, Sophie Cook, Sophie Bancroft and Pauline Prior-Pitt. That's been an amazing lovely punctuation throughout the discussions to have you all bringing these beautiful pieces to us. And the back of house team, who have been amazing. You haven't seen what they've been doing, but it's been incredible from my point of view. Kirsten Clarkane and Eleanor Fraser, Laurie Carruthers and Gloria Lowe, and of course the indomitable Gail Halverson for making this all happen. And to all of you who have attended, I've really appreciated it. And it's been very hard to keep up with the levels of expertise that are in the chat box. So I really appreciate it. I now want to go through all of those links and explore them. So thank you so much. So please take a look at SEDA Land's new resource pages, the first stop to finding out all about land related issues, including a page on housing. SEDA's next event will be the 6th Howard Little Memorial Lecture, The Legacy of Fritz Schumacher, on Wednesday the 3rd of May. And the next SEDA Land events will be Beltane at the Sheeling Project, a 1.5-day festival for young people working in rural Scotland, and Bio Caledonia, Get Ready for the Future, the keynote event at Groundswell, which is the regenerative farming festival to be held at Falkland about the imminent biodiversity legislation. So if you would like to support SEDA, please do become a member or subscribe to SEDA newsletters for information for future events. Thank you all very much. And we've actually managed to skim in under our 2 hours. So that's super. Thank you very much. Good evening.